If I could ask everyone to take their seats and we'll get started with the next panel. Okay, well, welcome back from the break. We have with us now the second distinguished panel. This one made up of representatives from some of the leading space agencies internationally. We'll follow the similar format. The panelists will each make a few opening remarks, and then we'll get into some discussion and opportunity for you in the audience as well to ask questions. Please just write them down on a piece of paper and pass to one of the IAF staff here. Again, to the panelists, especially those that are going to be walking towards the podium, like I cautioned the last group, we're not going to be doing any tap dancing today here because it's a little shaky on the front of the podium. So this is now the agency panel on commercial space flight. And so we're all very interested in the perspective from the agencies as we enter this time where the space programs really around the world start to look more at commercial ways of doing things, and the kind of things that we're all interested in is how supportive the agencies are to this kind of a movement, and to what extent they're willing to support this, because potentially there are lower costs involved, but also there's a giving up of a certain amount of control of programs by moving in this direction. So these are the kind of things we'd like to explore. So we'll move across the panel as we did last time for some brief introductory remarks. We begin with Alexey Krasnov, who's the Director of Human Spaceflight at ROCOSMOS. Alexey, please.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here again and to speak on such a challenging, I would say, topic, because normally it is not the government business to develop commercial space capabilities. However, the role of the government is obvious, as it was mentioned on the previous panel, and especially how the space policy will evolve further on in this human space flight. Of the expectations and of public and capabilities and aspirations, if you will, in the to conquer new frontiers with human beings. To fly further beyond the low Earth orbit, and to do something new, comparing what we used to have, what we used to be doing for the last almost 50 years, even more. Therefore, the role of commercial entities to be involved in a human space flight, comparing to what role is and was proven for years in the different areas of space activities, is very challenging, I would say. And the risk of business ventures, which were set in the recent years, I presume is pretty high, because for quite a number of entities were created within the last 10-15 years. However, we saw here 5 entities, not all of them, of course, who might be here on the stage, but it's not that many who succeeded, who were successful and moving forward and making profits year by year and moving forward, especially when they are introducing some innovative approaches in the development of hardware, vehicles, launchers. That's very interesting initiative which emerged not long time ago. Therefore, I believe this topic is very interesting for governments, how commercial capabilities can complement governmental programs for the future, and to have this new balance of interests of business and government for research, and especially in the human spaceflight. Therefore, it's a pleasure to be here and speak on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for those remarks. Next, we pass the floor to Bill Gerstenmaier, the Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations at NASA in the U.S. Bill.
I think Alexey gave a very nice phrase at the beginning. It's not the role of government to develop private sectors, but to enable. And I think that's a very interesting way to think of it. So I think our role as a government entity is how do we enable that activity? And I was asked to talk about the future state of commercial activities. So I tried to pick the most futuristic chart and rendering and artist concept that I could find, and this is it. And it's a vision of commercial spaceflight to low Earth orbits. It's a robust, vibrant, profit-making commercial enterprise with many providers and a wide range of private and public uses. And then our commercial activities are trying to enable that future. And then the other key piece to this is it's not just about the launch vehicles and the other part. There needs to be a market. And I think that's where Space Station plays a really key role. I think Space Station can be that enabler that allows terrestrial companies to learn what they can gain and what they can benefit from low Earth orbit microgravity research that then spawns this launch market that then actually delivers cargo, delivers crew, delivers capability to space. Eventually I see Space Station going away. The government space station will go away and it'll be replaced by private space stations, and then low Earth orbit is taken over by the private sector. It was talked about earlier in the other session about, it's also about the acquisition approach. So if you take a look at the way we look at this, there's the typical program characteristics, right? The owner in the typical program has been NASA. In the case of the commercial-oriented approach, it's industry, contract type, cost plus on the typical side, fixed price on the commercial side, private-public partnership on the commercial side, government and non-government customers on that other side, where NASA's the only customer when it's a NASA procurement. One, for the funding for the capability all comes from NASA. In the case of the commercial activity, we expect NASA to split that with the commercial provider. NASA's role in the capability development, NASA defines what and how in our programs. In the other case, we just define the how at a very high level. Industry defines the how, and NASA just essentially approves the how. So we're not even in a development role in any way, shape, or form. Requirements definition, NASA defines requirements. We basically accept, we may define extremely the high level requirements, but we accept the lower level requirements from the commercial side. And last, the cost structure is the costs are shared on the commercial side. I think we've tried a bunch of different approaches to do this. Each approach was tailored a little bit to meet the specific needs. I think within the commercial crew program that Alexey was alluding to, what things are we trying to put in place? And so we're trying to make sure there's no technology breakthroughs are required. So in other words, it's experienced technology that's there. We don't want to be pushing the envelope. We want to make sure that there's a prospect of other customers beyond NASA, that it's not just NASA investing in us, that there's a financial investment by the commercial side. The government will be the foundational base. For example, the International Space Station starting up, and it was talked about earlier today, extending Space Station to 2024 really gives a realistic market that can actually be realized and used by folks. And then the last thing is there needs to be a strong industrial base. There needs to be a lot of companies that are willing to go do this activity and go forward, or they're really not ready to be enabled and meet our needs. So in summary, I think stations cargo resupply has been seen as a pretty good capability. I would caution ourselves. I put the word still learning up there. I think, we could very well see a loss of a spacecraft in the commercial cargo world, and that's acceptable to us. We went into that model that we're not flying any absolute critical hardware on any flights. And if we do that, we need to just dust ourselves off, figure out what went wrong, fix it, and get back flying again. Commercial crew is pushing that paradigm more, where the stakes of risk are much, much higher. We cannot accept the failures, as Alexey alluded to. We're trying to put safeguards in place to make sure we get requirements defined up front, try to make sure that our involvement is appropriate but not excessive with the commercial side. And then lastly, I think when I talk human spaceflight, I really think not only the commercial sector, I think ISS, I think SLS and Orion, I see the entire gamut. So the government's role is to be pushing that frontier, pushing that horizon, and as soon as that horizon is ready to be turned over, we need to find ways to enable industry to come in behind us, and then we can buy those services, and then that allows us to do something that's even more audacious and even push further out in the solar system. So thanks.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Monsieur Jean-Jacques Dordain, the Director General of ESA.
Okay, thank you. So, first of all, commercial space flight. I must say that the adjective commercial with my experience, I think that commercial has as many meanings as number of speakers that I have listened to so far. Because there are so many different cases in what we call commercial space flight that each time I wonder to which case are we speaking about. But in any case, it looks good. It looks good, especially for government, because they think that they can save money. So this is, in my view, the only common definition of all what is called commercial. Less money from governments. While industry providers, that is an evidence, because everywhere in the world, anyway, the providers are industry. Even in the last century approach, the providers were industry, and they are still industry. So and this is the reason why when you put together commercial spaceflight and industry providers, I must say that it depends under which conditions industry is providing the spaceflight. This is to start with. So which are the requirements from institutional users? And we, ESA, we are part of the institutional users. I think that the requirements are very easy to define. We want a guarantee of the flight, and we want low cost. I must say that I don't see any other requirement. So guarantee means a reliable space vehicle, and with no other government interference, because what we wish and what the governments of the ESA member states want is not to be dependent on the decision of other governments. So this is for what concerns the guarantee. Low cost, I must say that there is no limit. The lower, the better. So can we use commercial flights for that? Certainly for the cost. But what about the guarantee? And that is certainly the most important question for us. Are we guaranteed to have a flight only through commercial flights? And so far, the European governments, they do not think that they can have a guarantee of launching their missions by using commercial flights. Just because they consider that all flights in the world are dependent on governments. In what any form or the other, being governmental launch vehicle or being vehicles dependent on the government market. So they consider that for the time being, they cannot rely upon commercial flights. And this is the problem that we have today. So what is the European approach today? It's to have a domestic approach. Anyway, the provider is industry, and it's Airbus Defence and Space, and for Ariane, and ELV for Vega. So it's European industry, the provider of our space flights. Under which approach so far? So far, the approach was the member states, they decide which vehicle they need, they fund the development, they contract to industry, and they even put industry in equal footing to make sure that there will be a guarantee of launch through European industry. I would like to recall that we in Europe, we were the first one to put in place a commercial operator, Arianespace. It was the very first commercial operator for spaceflight in the world. Maybe it was not a vision. I know that it's always good to say that we had a vision. In my view, it's much more pragmatic. We had no choice. We had no choice to put a commercial operator in place because, unfortunately, the European institutional market is too small to sustain a launch service alone. So Arianespace was there to go on the commercial market, and this is the reason why, because at that time the commercial market was the best way for governments to have a guarantee of access to space through Arianespace. And it works well. It works well, but we are reflecting on can we change the approach? And why changing the approach? Mostly because governments, they consider that they can get that guarantee with less money. This is the, let's say, the goal of governments. It's not something different than that. And this is the reason why we are discussing on how can we change the share of responsibility between governments and industry, but to continue to have a guarantee of access to space, and if possible, at lower cost. And this is exactly what we are discussing these days. And we are looking at which type of partnership we can have with industry, again, to continue to have a guarantee of access to space, but at lower cost for the governments. And that, there is a lot of models. There are the models of the rich and the models of the less rich. The rich are the ones who have such a huge institutional market that they can use different models. United States, they have different models of partnership. We in Europe, we start to have a significant European institutional market, but not yet at a size where we can develop different models, and we have to develop the model which is shaped according to our needs and our situation. It's what we are doing right now. We are trying to develop a partnership with industry to see how we can continue to have a guarantee of access to space at lower cost, where we can guarantee an institutional market to industry, against which they are providing a guarantee of access to space at lower cost. We are discussing on how we share the responsibilities, how we share the funding, how we share the risks. All that is under discussion, and I can tell you that the last 2 days we have discussed a lot, but still a lot to do, but we are making progress. And as I was saying to one of my colleagues, I see that there is movement because there is resistance. Because resistance is a very positive signal because it means that there is movement. And I can tell you that when I measure the resistance, there is movement. And I am sure that we are moving into the right direction. So that is what we are doing today. Now, maybe there will be a much longer term situation where we could find launch services everywhere in the world, not dependent on government. And the day there is that may change totally what I have said. But to have launch services available not dependent on government, we need a mass market. Because this is the only solution to have a launch service not dependent on government. Is it space tourism? Is it a huge global exploration program? We shall see. Now, just to finish with that, I hope that it's not in the too long term, because I would like myself to be a customer of a commercial space flight, and so go quick, because I am ready to be a customer. Thank you.
I guess ready to be a customer in more ways than one then. Interesting point. And so we move now to the final panelist, which is Kiyoshi Higuchi, who is the Vice President of JAXA. Higuchi-sensei, please.
Now, I'm sitting as a Vice President, not a President of IAF, because we have a very limited resources. I have to work so hard. Okay, anyway, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I really enjoyed talking. Then, okay, I will give you the more fundamental, some kind of trend of commercial flight. As I think about the topics of today's panel, that is the relationships between the commercial flight and the institutional users. Let me tell you first about my observation on the recent trend in the space activities. We have been challenging the space frontier for a long time. Then we found that we can use that technology that we have acquired through the challenge the frontier for the daily life. Then the nature of the technology should be changed, like on this chart. If we use the technology for daily life, we don't need advanced technology. We would not take any risks, and we should be a lower cost. So then, as you see this chart carefully, you will notice that these technology would be better development commercially rather than by government institution. Based on these observations in Japan, we introduced a commercial capability for the next space program. However, many countries want to keep their autonomous capability like Europe to access a space. It is not easy for any country to achieve the two goals of the introducing commercial capability and maintain national autonomous capability. Recently, Japanese government created a new launch vehicle project with the aiming to achieving these goals. How do we implement this? That's a problem on this panel, I think. So let me introduce Dr. Masashi Okada, our new project manager of the HX project, tell you about this project and how to implement the Japanese policy. Okay, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Masashi Okada from Space Transportation Mission Directorate. I'm very happy to have this opportunity to talk about new launch system. As Mr. Higuchi mentioned, we are now at a turning point to step up to the next stage. In order to move to the next stage, it is necessary to change the business framework by introducing completely new launch system. We call it HX. The primary requirements of HX are as follows. The first priority is to efficiently meet the launch demand for government satellite with assured independent access to space. The other important requirement is to answer to the demand for applications and social infrastructure by introducing commercial capability. We proposed the mission and the concept of the HX to the government last year, and the government approves the development of the HX. We are now preparing to start the phase A. This is not just a project, but the program that provides a solution for Japan's accessibility to space. Mr. Higuchi assigned me the task of phase A last week. Therefore, I'm talking here today. This slide shows the concept of the HX under consideration. I'm afraid I don't have much time today, so I'd like to skip detail and talk about the framework for the development. I hope you can grasp the concept of HX in this chart. Until now, we JAXA had developed and integrated with support of contractors. This time, we collaborate with a commercial launch provider from the early development phase, including mission definition and the system design. The launch service provider is also a prime contractor for the development. We share the mission requirements and operation concept with them. We JAXA are responsible for the program and also the total system, including the ground facilities. The contractor is responsible for the development of launch vehicle for its own operation in the future. This means front-loading or advance commitment of the launch service provider to the development. When the launch service provider can be independent and provides the launch service commercially, JAXA will become a smart buyer of launch service. This is our business model. We will do our best to achieve our goal. And we will present the progress of the development at the IAC and the other conference. When the phase A is completed successfully, I will be back again. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation and the remarks as well, Higuchi-sensei. I remind the audience that there's the opportunity, if you have a question, please write it down on a piece of paper and pass it to one of the staff and we'll introduce it into the discussion. So let me start perhaps with the observation and question to some words that Jean-Jacques shared with us. You said that the your definition of commercial space was that it was costing less, or that this was the universally accepted definition, and the less money, the better. But I wonder how you reconcile that with the fact that sometimes, on a commercial approach, often the approach is to pass more risk to the industry that's taking the commercial project, and more risk often equates to more higher cost. So perhaps some increase in guaranteed service or in sustainable service offering, but there's a higher risk that the commercial company needs to assume for that, and typically would expect to be being paid more. So in that case, we wouldn't necessarily expect it to be a lower cost by going the commercial approach. How do you comment to that?
No, but as I said, there are two requirements for the institutional users. It's one, guarantee, and the reliability is part of the guarantee. Obviously, if we have a launcher which has one failure every 2 launch, it's not a guarantee. So the guarantee is clearly, as I said, for me the guarantee is reliability, which is technical, and there is no interference from another government, because for institutional missions, this is something which is important. And the second requirement is low cost. So you are right. If we have to have the two, it's not either or. And this is exactly what we are discussing with industry. It's can we continue to have the guarantee? Because today we have the guarantee with Ariane. We have the guarantee. It's reliable. It does not depend on other government, and so the guarantee is there. What we would like is to try to see if it can be less costly for the governments. And this is exactly what we are discussing with industry today. It's can they make a service which is cheaper, but obviously not to the detriment of the guarantee, and in particular the reliability. That it's and again, it's not a choice between the two. We want to have the two at the same time.
Yeah, you'd like the cake and to eat it too.
Yes,
but there's a bit of a trade-off there, right? If I'm industry and you're coming to me and say, provide me a guaranteed service, I'll say I can do that, but I need to manage the risk then. You, the agency, aren't going to manage the risk. I'll have to on the industry side, and there'll be some cost to manage that risk to provide you the guaranteed service.
Yes. No, but it's what I said. We are discussing right now to say how can we share the responsibility, how can we share the funding, and how can we share the risks. This is exactly the discussions that we are having with them. We think that there is a way, yes. So far, the discussions are going into the right direction. We have still to make progress, but it's exactly what we are trying to do with them. And part of the share of the risk is obviously related to the risk that they are taking on the market, and this is where the fact that we could guarantee an institutional market is part of the sharing of the risks. And this is exactly what we are trying to discuss with industry. So there is still some weeks and months of discussion, but so far, I must say that we are on, at least on the right direction.
Thank you. Let me ask Bill a question. You gave us a nice overview of how commercial space activities fit into the broader landscape and the existing SLS and Orion program. And I'm wondering your willingness to have a commercial human launch capability provided by industry, and we saw one example of that on the previous panel with the Mark Sarangelo and the Dream Chaser vehicle of Sierra Nevada Corporation. Are you willing to accept that that commercial approach because you feel to have a backup with the Orion vehicle to provide you that the assurance? Is that part of the equation, that as a government buyer you're willing to take the I don't know, the risk or accept the commercial provision as long as you're sure that you've got a backup?
Yeah, I don't see Orion as a backup to the commercial crew activity at all. The rocket is way oversized for what it needs to do. The capsule's too big for going to station, so it is not a viable backup. Again, I think our backup comes from today. We have 3 providers that are going through the first phase of the contract. We have 3 providers in the Space Act agreement activities. So some of that backup has come through carrying multiple providers through this activity, and we'll try to carry those multiple providers as long as we can to give us that assurance of moving forward. So again, I think Jean-Jacques clarified it really very well. You're going to have to share risk. So how do you get the level of risk to the right approach? And that's what we're trying to do through this program and this project.
Thank you. I understand the multiple paths, commercial paths now, and the backup that provides. There was a time not too long ago when there was a bit of a gap, and I think the United States used the Russian providers to send American astronauts into space, perhaps as a backup during that gap period. So my question is perhaps to the panel as a whole, and you can each comment on that, your willingness to use international provision of launches, but in particular human spaceflight launches. And in the past, space has been a very nationalistic kind of activity. Certainly if we go back far enough, it was. Increasingly we see space industry being multinational, international in its scope and what they're doing. Are the agencies moving in that direction as well? Are you willing to accept international provision of your human crews into space? Or do you encourage commercial provision, but only if it comes within your own borders? So please, to the panel as a whole.
I would like to make a note as so far the only provider of capabilities to deliver crews to ISS. I will tell you frankly that I personally and as an agency, we are feeling, if not awkward, but not safe when we are having only one for capability to support space station with only one type of vehicles. That is not right. And generically, I will respond that as many capabilities we will have, as a stable program we will eventually support. And commercial capabilities will complement the governmental capabilities eventually. And when we are talking about the risks, when Jean-Jacques mentioned on several occasions, it's very important to understand the difference in risks and assurances and guarantees which could be provided in a human spaceflight. When we are talking human spaceflight, not cargo delivery, yeah, we can withstand the loss of the vehicle with the cargo. No, it's not a problem. But when we are talking about the standards which government assures to be applicable for human spaceflight and monitors and making sure that all done right when the people will be on the vehicle. That is important, the role of the government here, to support this guaranteed service to be provided by the commercial providers. And eventually, that is a public-private partnership will work. And government will switch eventually to the new frontiers. I believe that is the logic how we will go further, because there is no question today about the success of the private initiative in the other areas like remote sensing, about the communications, navigation. But human spaceflight is special because it is human, and it's special by definition. And that's why the role of the government here may be longer and more visible, so to speak, rather than in other areas of space exploration. Thank you.
I would add a little bit to Alexey's point. You talked about us. I think
we will never see Soyuz really going away as a launch capability to the space station. Even when we have our commercial providers there, we honestly need a backup capability. We need dissimilar redundancy. We have that in many places on board the space station today: oxygen generation, carbon dioxide removal. When we were flying shuttle and we had the Columbia tragedy, if it wasn't for Soyuz, we would have decrewed space station, and we probably would have not completed the actual assembly of space station. So that dissimilar redundancy is important. And so I don't see it as when we get commercial crew on the U.S. side that our dependence is there. You'll see parsed in all the words that come out of my office, it says our sole reliance on Russia, and sole is important. We put a tremendous burden on Russia when we stepped down. Alexey would come to me and talk to me about what a tremendous burden you've given us. You know, we're now responsible for taking crew to and from the space station. And I mean, it was a tremendous burden that they accepted, and it was a tremendous task they've borne. And so as soon as we can get our U.S. commercial providers there, not to take away that burden, but to share in that burden so we can continue to do this international thing in space is exactly what we want to go do.
I think that on the ESA side, we have no choice for human space flights. We have to rely upon our partners. It's very simple. And when I was speaking of
here's an extra one here.
hello, wait. So you see that I need an international partner. So it's it's a demonstration that I cannot do without international partners. Even though I am not ready to launch astronauts on a Japanese vehicle for the time being, but okay. But when I was speaking in my introductory remarks of institutional mission, it was not missions of astronauts. For the astronauts, it's clear that we are totally dependent on the Russian today, the Russian Soyuz, and later on the others provided by the commercial providers. Let's say that it's number one. Number two, I always said, and I must say that I am repeating that since years, that for exploration we have to share the transportation systems. I must say that the interesting part of exploration, I am sorry, is not the trucks. So we have to use trucks to go to the moon, to Mars, to wherever we shall go together. And it's a global exploration. And we would be totally stupid not to share the transportation. And this is what we are trying to discuss, and that there are some progress which have been made, especially on standard interface, because it starts by that. We cannot share the transportation if we have not standard interface, and we have discussed a lot on that. So I hope that we shall make progress, because it's clear that I am convinced that there will be a global exploration program, which is already there, but which will grow. And clearly, for that part of our activities, for that part of the institutional missions, we have to share the transportation. We would be totally stupid not to share.
Even if it's commercially provided, not in partnership with foreign agency partners.
Yes, even if this is commercially provided, I must say, as I said, the interesting part of exploration is not on the trucks. The interesting part is where we shall go and what we shall go there. And myself, I am for the competition of science, competition of technology. On exploration should not be only cooperation, because cooperation is boring. But if there is one part on which we have to cooperate, is certainly the trucks, and I think that it will come.
I think it's a good answer. Thank you for that. Higuchi-san, your view.
Yeah. Earlier speaker already speak what I want to say. But, okay, although the Japanese government does not make any decision on how cooperate, global human exploration. But definitely, the Japan really like to cooperate to develop and operate the next international human exploration. That means this is one of my dream to develop some human transportation system under the cooperation, not only the space agency but also the commercially. Then we need probably a redundancy, which we learned a lot from ISS program. Then we need build at least 2 or 3 capabilities and for very risky or very important capability to the Mars or to the further human exploration. Okay, that's my opinion.
Thank you. Yeah, I think your point is interesting of international cooperation is not just between agencies necessarily in this new model, but even on a commercial industrial side.
Based on the cooperation between the agency on the space station program, we should expand the commercial cooperation. I really want to do.
Yeah, and I think we've seen some of that starting, and I think it's venues such as the IAF provides that we really see industry starting to cross those borders and offer services, trans-border services. So thank you for that. So one moment here. So we have a question. Okay, so the question, sorry, I'm not debating the question, just making sure I'm able to read the handwriting. So the question, it's a 2-part question, and it's for all the 4 panelists. What is the one topmost expectation from the launch industries, and what is the one topmost action that space agencies must do to enable a commercial launch industry? So I guess the first part of the question is really the wrong panel to be answering that one. But what, from an agency perspective, I guess, what would you say would be the one of the topmost actions that you could do to enable a commercial launch industry? Any takers on that question? Or if I could say,
from the first glance, I would say that that's really a little bit different from the topic what we discussing today. But I believe it's one of the segment, so to speak, of the commercial activities in space business is a launch business. Whatever you are launching a spacecraft, or you're launching a vehicle, or you are launching eventually you will launch a human being on a spacecraft. However, what is being asked for is how we can enable the development of the launch industry and launch capabilities. That's for human spaceflight, I believe that is a development of a new class vehicles. And that will eventually cause the question how, what Jean-Jacques is pointing to, and he is a strong believer of that the united fleet for international sense. Because if we will have a super heavy lift vehicle, that is an expensive thing. And that is not, as of today, at least, for commercial sector. And there will be a niche of the commercial companies to develop new capabilities and less costly capabilities to decrease cost of the 1 kilogram to orbit. And that is for the interest of institutional users to purchase, like from the shelf, the service, maybe that eventually will happen, hopefully. And that is for the role of the governments and institutional users for these purposes. Thank you.
I would say in Commercial Crew, one thing we did to help enable the industry is we gave them essentially a set of human rating requirements which were smaller than, first of all, our typical set of requirements for human rating. But then we also gave them the chance to go back and tell us, is there another way that you would like to do this task? In other words, do you have to follow this certain specification? The way we do certification, typically in NASA, we have a very rigorous certification plan. We were open to their suggestions on, is there a better way to do certification that gets you the same quality out the other side with less cost? So we're in the process right now of going and reviewing these 4 products. We asked for them. We asked for standards, specifications. We asked for hazard reports. We asked for certification plans and verification plans. We got lots of comments from the providers, probably over 140 changes they actually wanted to go change. And now, because of the seriousness, our engineers are spending quality time, almost solid weeks, going through each one of these, looking at them and say, is this an equivalent way of getting the same safety out the other side? And if it is, we provide that answer back to the provider. That enables them to take a lower cost solution. If it's an area that we just don't think we're quite ready to go do that, we think this area absolutely requires tests. It's not good enough to just verify it by analysis. We'll tell them that. Then they can price back to us what it's going to take for them to add in the test in that particular area. So I think we reached out to them and not assuming our way was the best way to do it, but we let the commercial industry tell us if there's other better ways to do it. I'll frankly tell you, we learned that from Space Station. We had no choice when we brought our international partners in. All the specifications throughout the world are all different. And we couldn't force them to adhere to our U.S. government specs. So we had to go out and look at the Russian specifications, look at European specifications, Japanese specifications on how they build hardware and say, was that equivalent to what we did? And they're radically different in pressure vessel specs, soldering specs, avionics, very, very different, but yet they still achieve the same results. So that kind of opened our thinking up that, yes, there is a better way of doing this, and we've enabled commercial industry to take a look and tell us what they think a better way is doing it, and we're open-minded enough to accept a different way of doing things, but still try to get the quality out the other side.
Thank you.
I shall just repeat what Bill was saying. I think that what the governments can do, the institutions can do to develop an launcher industry, it's number one, to bring an anchor tenant market, because it starts by that. Number two, to listen to the launcher industry, and it's what we are trying to do also. And number three, I take the point of Bill also, which is a certification, because there is a responsibility of launching state, which is something which is not trivial, because launcher can always have a problem, and the responsibility of the consequence is an important factor. And I think that this is the three main topics on which we can certainly do something, but it can only be through a dialogue with the launcher industry.
Let me just ask perhaps a follow-up question, because I'm detecting a lot of alliance between those center two chairs there. You seem to be reinforcing each other's points. But in terms of...
it's because we know each other since so long that nobody remembers when we have started together, so it's including ourselves. That it's...
So, but from the perspective of openness to, or embracement of commercial approach of delivery of space, there are some differences, I think, between Europe and the US. So in the US, we are seeing this approach where the government is willing to provide a guarantee to buy a service if there's an investment in industry, even significant investment. Are you foreseeing that kind of an approach will come in Europe as well?
Yes, it's what I am saying. I think that the main difference between Bill Gerstenmaier and myself is that our respective institutional market is at the size of our respective budget. He has a market which is 10 times bigger than the one that I can bring to European industry, and I can tell you that is a big difference. And as I said, there is the approach of the rich and the approach of the less rich. Unfortunately, ourselves, we have to take the approach of the less rich. But the principles are the same. The principles are the same. So there is no challenge of principles between the US approach and what we are today building up in Europe. Again, the key difference is our respective budget, and I dream to have the budget of NASA. I know that my colleague Charlie Bolden is always complaining about his budget, but my dream would be to have his budget.
And I'm sure there are many in the room that would dream to have the ESA budget as well.
So we'll give you the budget, but then we'll give you all the congressional constraints that come along with the budget. So they're of equal magnitude. Now you have more diversity than I do.
I can give you my member state.
This will be real commercial industry here.
So as you see, he will be the next Director General of ESA.
Higuchi-sensei, please. Please,
Okay.
Higuchi-sensei.
Let me add another aspect. In the Japan, you know that Japan is a less budget than ESA. Then one of the big challenge in Japan. Okay, is there any Japanese company? Japanese company don't want to the independent from government. They still rely on the space agencies, the government too much. Okay, they understand in general the technology is quite matured to independently use. Then space agency, okay, guaranteed to some development of the very important risky technology to develop by the government budget. But they don't satisfy that only the support to the develop the risky technology development. They really ask us to support more. That's our problem.
Is it? I wonder how much the reason of that, or how much that could perhaps be solved by additional incentives from the government side that would make, as we heard on the previous panel from when we had the industry representatives, a key thing from the industry side is having a solid business case to move forward. All industry has to answer to their shareholders. And so is it the question perhaps of there being the climate and the ability to put together a business case that makes sense for them to make those investments?
What we are trying to do is, government guarantees the development of each launch vehicle, including a very risky technology, or then we transfer that technology to the company. Then we ask them to be independent without any government support when they can get to the enough capability. But they still ask us to continue the support. That means that they want to share the risk, not on, with the government. Mm-hmm. They want to continue the guarantee from the government. Then right now, probably within 1 year, like Dr. Okada said, we will right now negotiate how to share such risk.
Mm-hmm. For the HX program. Yes. Yeah. Very good, thank you. Let me just see how we're doing time-wise here. perhaps one more topic. So we heard a little bit again in the industrial panel of the how industry was looking for certain support from government for to enable commercial business more, including things like providing some guarantee of a follow-on business, some sharing of risk, and I think we've heard the whole panel say from the agency side there's a willingness to do that. But even not just technical risk, but even financial risk, I think, is quite important for industry. And do you foresee going forward that from an agency side, things will be moving further in that direction, that agencies will be trying to create environments that industry would be even better able to build business cases so that they make those investments, and the financing of the space programs happens really external from the agencies rather than the agencies being the actual source of the financing?
I think that my answer is very simple. Yes, financial risks are an important factor because, as I said, what we wish is to have a guarantee of being launched. And I am not so sure that the best guarantee is to have an industrial company which is losing money. I am not so sure that this is sustainable and that will provide the best guarantee that we are asking for. And this is the reason why, yes, you are right in the discussions that we have with industry. We have to discuss with industry on how we can share the risks, because as I said, it's a very important factor, because the member states of ESA, they want also to limit their risk. But on the other hand, it's clear that providing conditions to industry to lose money is certainly not the best way to have a guarantee of access to space.
In Japan, I think it is very difficult for us to support that, financially. However, in the viewpoint of the autonomous capability, which Japan would like to maintain, then we might get some program, but probably it is very difficult to support the financially direct. That's Japanese government policy, I think. It's very difficult for us.
I was just going to say, and not only enable, but also don't compete with industry either. If there's a capability that industry is mature enough and they're really ready to take responsibility and go do a particular activity, we should just go acquire the service and don't develop it even though we could in the government, and then effectively we're competing with industry. So that's another way. That also causes a problem sometimes when we start an activity, because if the government's involved, then it's perceived as being too risky and too costly for any private company to ever go do it. So when I enter into an area of exploration or an area to go do things, that's seen as a government person that's doing that. Only the government can do it. Then when another company wants to come in and do something, they're actually held back from doing that because it's seen as only a government function. So I've got to figure out a way that as we talk about this next generation of space stations that will replace our government space station, how do I enable and actually show that that's now a capability that a commercial company can easily step up to and provide the capability to do research in space, and it doesn't require the government function. So we've got to think about how we do that as we go forward, so we're not competing with industry. We're trying to start.
What you're really saying is convincing industry that it's commercially interesting.
Yes.
It's almost the reverse of what we talked about earlier, yeah.
And I would like to add what Bill said. I believe space station today has a good potential to bring more commercial interest to the human space flight. And that is a goal among the partnership to actually to gain from this direction, from this new new development in terms of utilization of the space station. If we will be successful in this, I believe that will enable the next step, not necessarily the launchers or the human space flight capabilities. What we are talking about as like a semi-commercial, semi-industrial production of something which is viable for the business in LEO orbit, first of all. What we're thinking about the role of LEO for future, because eventually, hopefully, the LEO will be occupied by commercial entities with a primarily commercial capabilities to be supported by commercial vehicles, and government will use LEO as needed, and we'll switch to the direction of exploration mostly because that's a governmental function first of all, and it's a high risk which is not sustainable for business as of today. That is a direction which we can actually take, and we are taking today with the space station to explain what capabilities are there, and that's government funded already, and they are available for business, and it's open capabilities to be utilized as much as it possibly can be done by the crew of 6 or 7 hopefully in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. I made a commitment that we would end at 7:45, and we've reached that time. Another question has just come in, which is quite interesting, and I suspect that there are other questions in the audience as well, or discussion points. I think most of our panelists and the previous panelists as well will join us for the reception after, so I encourage the discussion to continue. Let me just perhaps summarize, certainly briefly summarize this panel from my perspective, I think, of the things we've heard here. We heard, I think, all the panelists, but I think Alexey said it first, this role of government is really to not to develop private industry or commercial industry, but rather to enable it. And I think we've seen a lot of examples of how the agencies are trying to enable that kind of business in space, and that is interesting and I think encouraging, certainly from an industrial perspective. Then the second point that we had, I think, also broad agreement on here was this idea of risk is not something that is owned by agencies or needs to be transferred to industry, but really the sweet spot, if we could call it that, is a sharing of the risk between agencies and commercial industry, and that's the way forward. Sharing of the risk and even sharing of the whole cost reduction methodologies. And then the third interesting point that came up was this point that international cooperation is interesting, but not just between agencies, but even that this whole concept of international cooperation actually is being extended now into the commercial realm, and that there are interesting solutions available there as well. And I think that's something relatively new for the space world that I think we'll see becoming increasingly important. So with that, I thank the panelists for sharing their thoughts with us here. I think we can take some encouragement from the views at the senior levels of the agencies of the way commercial approaches to space are being encouraged and the way international cooperation is happening. So thank you all for joining us here. I also thank you, the audience, for hanging in here. I'm happy to see that the room is still quite full, perhaps even a little fuller than when we started, which is good. I remind you that we have a reception immediately following this. It's upstairs, so in the next few minutes, make your way upstairs and perhaps engage some of the panelists on this panel and the previous one. Thank you very much.
Personne ne sait ce qui se passe aujourd'hui parce que personne ne veut qu'il se passe quelque chose.